Welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the little pause there. We were just trying to fix our noses. So we are about to move on to our next fact. You were joining us for the big No Such Thing as a Fish comic relief marathon. We're so excited. We're so close to hitting our target. We're on 99%, I believe. We're 500 pounds away from hitting 35,000 pounds. Once again, that means nothing. We want way more. So please help us smash it while we have our next guest on the show. And oh my goodness, we are so delighted to be reunited once again with the man who gave us our name, the QI Elves, who gave us careers, who gave us our whole life, I would say. It is the wonderful Mr. Stephen Fry.
Hello.
Yay!
Hello. I'm delighted to be reunited too. That should go on my gravestone.
Well, thank you for being here. What is your fact for us today? Fact number 5.
Well, I want to tell you about the first, and as far as I know, still the only, but maybe not, animal or creature, living thing to be named after Twitter. It's appropriate enough. If you were going to name an animal after Twitter, what sort of animal would it be? Probably, I'm guessing, like me, you would think if only they could discover a parasite that lived off the genitals of other creatures, that would be appropriate for it. And sure enough, it's called something like Trimesium twitteri, and it is a little parasitic thing that feeds happily from the genitals, male and female, because it's a very modern thing, as it's discovered by Twitter. So it is, in every sense, non-cis or normative, I think. And it likes to, just to get down there and have a good old nibble.
Lovely.
How did you discover something on Twitter? Was it just tweeting along, maybe, or?
Sad admission for my life, really, isn't it? Is that it seems to be a lot of trawling and a lot of byways. You know, I'm sure you're the same. It's not Wikipedia, for heaven's sake, Twitter, although I also was proud to give you the name Wikipedia, by the way.
You are, yes.
For QI's Twitter ID. And but nonetheless, you can go up some wonderful blind alleys, through some wormholes and portals into weirdness, and also fabulous. It's much more than what it's now being decried as, Twitter. I think there's a lot of life and positivity and fun and information out there, as you, I'm sure, well know. You are part of that.
Yeah. Rather than looking at wormholes, they were looking at millipedes holes, I think, and someone had put a picture.
That's right. You're absolutely right. I think it was discovered by just an observation of a tiny thing. In that sense, despite they're so out of fashion these days, Jacques Derrida was probably right. It is only through difference that we obtain meaning, and it's just the tiniest little white specks on this grim-looking creature, and someone who saw them on Twitter decided that they were likely to be a parasitic fungus of some kind.
It is amazing.
That's
this was investigated, and sure enough it was. So actually my introduction saying that it was all about how Twitter is a place for bottom feeders is really very unfair. It was because Twitter was being used in the best possible way the internet can be used, as a vector for open science and inquiry, which is great.
Yeah.
But this wasn't if it feeds on genitals, it wasn't someone sending a dick pic, was it? You'd be like, oh man, actually, hang on.
For once, no, I think. No, for once it was, although again, it is one of those slightly slimy, I wouldn't say phallic exactly, but it's a bit like, is there a male equivalent of the old terrible vagina indentata idea that genitals have teeth? Which was either spread around by parents and aunts and grandmothers in order to frighten children off experimentation, or it was, in the case of the vagina indentata, was a kind of terrible church calumny thrown against women that, basically a warning to all men that it'll get chopped off if you dare to go down there. But there's also this idea, I suppose, of a urethra with tiny little lines of teeth, which is pretty grim, isn't it?
I've got 3 aunts, and not one of them has ever warned me.
I like many listeners, thought they were about to say you had 3 urethras. Really impressive. Which does remind me of a moment in school. And you know, there are times when a horrible truth hits you. An absolutely horrible truth. And this happened in the showers at school, and you're going to go, no, hang on, Stephen.
Let's cut to a break, Alex.
No, but, if you imagine that at school, I suppose if we had a name for the urethra, we'd probably just called it a slit. I think in Jean Genet, it's the eye of Gabez or something like that. But anyway, we call it a slit. And this boy obviously looked at another boy in the shower, presumably out of curiosity rather than anything really too dreadful, and then pointed and went, ha ha, look, he said, Johnson's only got 1 slit. And everybody turned to stare at him. And then he looked at other people and then looked down, and he had a fusion in the middle of his urethra. So he appeared to have 2 urethras. And he obviously all his life had thought that was the norm. And so he had pointed at
what a modern
every eye just, and he went, oh dear.
Do you think he would have to stand in between 2 urinals?
This was in the. That's true. Yes. There's a moment in Ulysses where that happens, isn't there? When finally Stephen meets Leopold Bloom, and they both have a pee against a wall, and he notices the bifurcation, and there's a lot of Joycean puns about the letter Y and all this kind of thing.
Stephen, we have really missed you. I mean, you've been back 5 minutes, and we're on bifurcated urethras.
And James Joyce.
It was never meant to be like that. I'm so sorry.
How did we get here? What convoluted path ended this up?
Well, the fungus,
parasite.
the millipede fungus, it is amazing. I mean, each one of these tiny spores of the fungus, it spends its entire life around the genitals of one millipede.
Oh, so it's monogamous, as it were.
I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, it lives on each individual lives at one site. I suppose. I don't know how they meet each other though.
Must be STD, is it? Like if you meet another millipede, then
it probably is. Yeah.
Yes. Well, they've got lots of legs with which to swipe left or right. But actually, I think it's American millipedes, isn't it? And if you've ever lived or stayed in the Americas, any part of the whole continent, north to south, probably not Canada so much, or the northern Canada, but you will know that millipedes there are not just tiny little friendly things that slip across. There's some really nasty ones. In fact, I think I'm right in saying, I'm sure somebody watching will know better than me, but in Dr. No, I think it is, or certainly one of the early Bond novels and indeed films, there's Bond is approached by an angry animal. And it's a tarantula in the film, but in the book it's a millipede. And Ian Fleming, with his typical kind of knowledge of these things, describes just how toxic, or venomous rather, they are, and they're not to be taken lightly, millipedes.
Wow. Well, I mean, why are we scared of spiders? They've only got 8 legs. Well, millipedes there going, hi guys.
And it may be, I mean, I may have got it wrong. It may be the American centipede, but some of them they're kind of armored. They look a bit like the kind of art director in a movie's idea of a vicious robotic nano creature. You know, they sort of almost look armored and plated and shiny and just metallic. And
I think it is the centipede, because they're I think the centipedes are hunters and millipedes are scavengers. They feed on leaf litter and things like this, but the centipedes they're really fast, and they're really they can be really aggressive. They're no fun.
It is then, yes. I mean, 1/10 as many legs, but 10 times as much aggression.
It's compensating for the lack of legs. Yeah.
Aren't millipedes the baddies historically? Haven't millipedes been the Nazis and the centipedes have been the allies? Didn't we mention this once, that I think millipede researchers are upset because in one of the campaigns in the Second World War, there were pictures of millipedes drawn up holding swastikas.
Yes, that's right.
And they've forever been associated with Nazis. You're all watching at home.
Do you think they
forever?
They look at the poster like Robert Webb and David Mitchell's characters going, are we the villains? Poor things.
I love as well. I think you're on some anti-campaign here, Anna, because no one's really been talking about it except us on our podcast and you again now, pushing this agenda that forever known as.
I know it could,
true.
Yeah.
But what's your feeling about? I'm not being entirely silly here, and it sounds as if I'm either being pathetically anti-woke or sort of making a silly point. But in the way that we have learned to talk about people, we're more sensitive about the language we use and how some words carry a very freighted history of insult and abuse and oppression and all the rest of it. And so we're more careful about those words. I remember reading, who was it? I think it was Simon, the great sports journalist. Come to me. You know who I mean. He writes the back page of The Spectator and as well as in Sunday. He writes. He's a great sports journalist. It's Simon Barnes.
Oh yeah.
He's also an amateur natural historian, an absolute lover of all things nature, and he wrote a wonderful book about his adventures. And I remember in the foreword, I think it is, he writes about how we cannot but help impute moral qualities, or indeed immoral qualities, to animals, utterly unjustified. But he said, have you ever looked at a picture of a hyena and wanted to use the word skulk, as if it's got something guilty in its walk, as if a hyena or a coyote or a jackal has a reason to be ashamed of what it does as perfectly as a peacock or a hummingbird or something that we then impute wonderful qualities to. Oh, look what a marvelous mother that bird is. But the vulture, we shiver. And now part of that is obviously to do with some evolutionary memory of the danger of certain types of animal or their toxicity or whatever it might be. But sometimes it is very interesting it would be a wonderful exercise to go to look at books describing animals and to see how even probably professional naturalists can't help but use words like skulk. Skulking.
Well, and I guess that comes in so much when they name species as well, doesn't it? Because the species naming industry is so creative, and it's constantly about taking these characteristics that you see in this little animal and then thinking of the human equivalent and imposing it on that. So whether it's, that, I think, is it a wasp that shakes its bum around that's called the Beyonce wasp or something? Or there's something named after so much named after Harry Potter characters. I think another parasitic wasp is named after Dementors because it turns cockroaches into zombies like a Dementor's piss would.
Yes, there are a few that do that, aren't there?
Yes.
The funguses that grow out of creatures and things.
Stephen, is there a louse named after you?
Yes, I believe there is.
Is there?
I think there is, yeah.
Thank you for that, James. It would be a louse, wouldn't it?
Do you know why?
Stephen Fry.
Wow.
Fry.
What qualities was the louse deemed to share with Stephen? Do we know?
Louse, it kind of overturns some theories that they had about louses or lice at the time, and because of the work Stephen did on QI.
So it was probably far more that you should have been the
I have a feeling that's what James is getting at, Stephen. Maybe he wants to hand it over officially in this call.
But it one of the most interesting things in all of science, I think, is the word we use for it is taxonomy. Because it's there at the beginning of Genesis, and whether one takes Genesis as a pleasant myth or the gospel truth, well, it won't be the gospel truth. That's in the next book of the Bible. You know what I mean? Whether one believes that or not, it's a very insightful thing that Genesis describes how Adam, his first act is to name the animals. And whatever science may be saying at the moment about the difference between human consciousness and animal consciousness, and as we know, that's quite a shifting playground at the moment, and we can't be absolutely certain until you can enter a consciousness of another person, let alone another animal. And but nonetheless, one of the obvious differences is that we can be pretty certain that an emu in Australia doesn't know what a puma is, and if shown pictures, wouldn't care. It would just run away or not respond. Whereas we, looking at anything new in the world, are consumed with curiosity and a desire to name it. And the act of naming is an act of mastery, and an extraordinary one in the case of taxonomy. I tried to devise I think I came with flock of geese, or it was actually F off Gus, I think, but try and get the orders right. Did you have kingdom to start with, don't you? You have the animal kingdom but then there are now more bacterial. There's archaeons and there's
archaea and
archaea.
What's the other one?
Anyway, there are these. Let's say originally, when I was young, there was only fungi and fauna and flora. Flora being all vegetable matter that you could conceive of, and fauna being all animals, and fungi being neither. But within that, there are these different categories, aren't there? And in order to describe something, you have to do a sort of game of reduction. It's an animal. It's then what's the next one? Phylum, is that the next one? I think whether it's a mammal or a reptile or a seed. It's very interesting. It's kind of and then after phylum, order, genus, species, and then you come down until eventually, if you come down mammal, ape, and then the order is hominid, and then Homo sapiens is our species, and that's the final distinguishing two words for it. And every living thing is described in that way. So species.
You think we'd
what
run
is
out
a species?
Like there are so many species, right? You think we'd run out eventually. I read that if you were going to make an insect of the month calendar, you could make it for 80,000 years with a different insect every single month, and you would never run out.
I'm sure that's true.
That's so good.
I think I remember saying on a QI once that if you wanted, like me or like you, to have anything named after you in the animal kingdom, it would be very easy. All you have to do is take a sheet and a powerful torch and go into the Amazon and put a sheet under the tree, and then get a smoke gun and fire the smoke gun into the tree, and then look at what lands in the sheet, and you can guarantee there will be 10 or 20 species of coleoptera.
But do you get excited, Stephen, by it? Because I've seen as well that an asteroid was named after you as well, which is just.
As I think I said at the time, I feel, given my contribution to astronomy and to the rest of the world, it'd be more appropriate to have a hemorrhoid named after too much sitting down and not enough doing anything. But it is, of course, a terrific honour, but it's also a sign of the sheer depth of activity in science generally, isn't it? There are so many new discoveries being made. And I don't want to get too boring about protecting science from a bad reputation, but science recognizes more than non-scientists do how incomplete science is as a subject, how vast the as Newton famously put it, the ocean of undiscovery that lies before us. And there are still so many things to discover on land, in forests, even in Britain there are things to discover, let alone in the oceans and in space. That's a
great one.
Sorry.
You go.
Well, I was just going to say, do you think that in 100 years there will have to be explanations beside every single species named in the scientific book saying, now Beyonce was. So this is the reason this fly is named the way it is.
Yeah.
It's going to be strange. It will be strange.
Like the Hoff crab. Have you heard of the Hoff crab?
The Hoff crab? No.
Well, there is, of course, a Hoff crab. There are a few Hoff things.
It's a deep-sea squat lobster named after David Hasselhoff because of a nice little tuft of hair that it's reminiscent of a half-naked David Hasselhoff running in the titles of Baywatch.
Nice. I assumed it would be that it hates being hassled, which actually most crabs do.
Yes.
So secondary meaning. I think there's John Cleese has got a lemur named after him, which
Yes,
is
he
good
has.
because
That's amazing. A primate. I mean, wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's big stuff. Usually it's like it's a parasite.
Well, usually it's a shitty louse, isn't it?
John Cleese has got a long-legged primate.
That is very impressive.
For a while, there was a Monty Python python, which was very exciting. There was a new python discovered, and they called it the Monty Pythonoides because it was found on a mount, they claimed. So that's hence the Monty. But sadly was reclassified a few years later. So there's still an opening for the Monty Python python.
I was slight sidebar, but when I was writing this book on Greek myth, the first one, and one of the sort of ancestors of all the monsters in Greek myth, of Cerberus and the Hydra and all of the ghastly creatures that you come across with many heads or other terrible features and poison blood and so on, they're almost all descended from Typhon, Typhon, who was one of the sort of first of the so-called chthonic monsters to grow up out of the ground. Typhoid and typhus are named after Typhon because they're terrible, as he was. And as it happened, Apollo's temple of Delphi, Apollo was sent there, and the area was called Python. And it was renamed Delphi because of Apollo, who was Delphi, who came from the womb. He was a twin of Artemis, and that's one of the theories anyway. But I don't want to get bogged down in this. But anyway, so the snake Python comes from Typhon. And I remember I wrote in a footnote something about how pleasing that Python is an anagram of Typhon. And my brilliant copy editor at Penguin, when he wrote me a little note that reminded me of a sort of Latin master at school, and said, "But I think you'll find Typhon is tau upsilon phi, whereas Python is pi upsilon theta." And of course, it's not an anagram to a Greek at all. That it is. I know that's really kind of hell. I'm in nerd paradise here, so
No, it's
I can't be nerdy with you people.
And you can't be alienating the ancient Greeks with your books. You know?
Exactly. It's a big market. Stephen, we're unfortunately going to have to wrap up. Thank you so much for doing this, and it's so lovely to see you again. We miss you so much.
Oh, thank you, darlings. I miss you all as well. And I think what you're doing is simply terrific. And anybody watching, do remember you can pitch in and add something that you can afford at any time, and it will make a real difference.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being there, everyone. Mr. Stephen Fry, and we will be back in just a couple of minutes with our next guest for fact number 6, and that is the entire team of My Dad Wrote a Porno. We'll see you then. Hey everybody, we hope you enjoyed watching that video from our 20-hour-long No Such Thing as a Fish comic relief marathon. There are plenty more videos to watch, but before you watch them, we're going to ask you to donate to the cause that we did this for. Go to the link below and you will be sent to comicrelief.com/fish, where you can donate and help change lives. Donate now.